Sydney. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here today. Yes, 37 years and 11 companies doing research and development as a food scientist. I've worked for small family-sized companies. I've worked for multinational Fortune 500 companies. I've done product development for B2B and B2C and private label. Somebody should have a first question here because I'm sure you all don't know what B2B is and B2C is. So I'll answer the first question. B2B is business to business. So that's if you're an ingredient supplier, you're selling to other businesses. If you're business to consumer, that's B2C. Okay, moving on to the next slide. This is, you'll be able to see it. Oh, look at that. You don't see my top of my screen. It says the commercial is what it says hidden behind that signage there. So what do? We do animal fat. That is lard and tallow. Can anyone tell me what the difference between lard and tallow is? Except for you two. Anybody? Anybody? Lard and tallow. Don't feel bad. I can't say I actually knew before I started this job either, and I had 33 years of food science in me before I started this job. So basically, lard is pig fat or pork fat. Tallow is beef fat, also could be lamb fat. Show of hands, who here thinks that animal fat is unhealthy? Now, you might have religious reasons, I understand, for not wanting to eat animal fat, or other personal reasons, or being a vegetarian. But how many people actually have read and believe that animal fat is bad for you? There's a handful of hands up. I would say that my upbringing also brought me up to believe that animal fat was bad for you. Now, when I started this job, in the interview, they mentioned multiple times the Big Fat Surprise. So that's the book that you see right up here. That's by Nina Tolkens is her name. And basically, it looks like a big, thick book. And I'm like, how am I ever going to make it through this book? It's just super thick. Well, I got to about 2/3 done, and the rest is just references. But basically, she debunks almost every bad thing there is to say about animal fats. So basically, animal fat is as healthy for you or unhealthy for you as any other fat. If you eat too much, yes, it's going to be unhealthy. If you eat in moderation, it's perfectly fine for you. And there are people that actually believe it possibly could be even more healthy for you. Okay, so in those chemistry classes or nutrition classes, if you are taking them, and you're learning about saturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, monounsaturated, transunsaturated fat, and then beyond that, it's like all of those 16 chain carbon, 18 carbon chain, so that's my job every day now. I have to understand and know everything about saturated, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, trans fat, the carbon chain links. And what you see here is basically, these are the 5 most common fats that are in almost every fat or oil. So vegetable oils or animal fats, it's pretty much these 5. There are, I think I've tested, on the test that I have done for fatty acid profile, I think there's 56. I believe I've read in literature there's like over 250 fatty acid compounds, but they're in such small amounts in a lot of things that you don't really pick it up. So, and just a quick chemistry lesson, just to help you remember. So if you see that sign 16.0, that's palmitic acid. So the 16 is the length of the carbon chain. So each of those carbon chains then have hydrogen listed off them. When you see the colon 0, that means there's no double bonds in that. If there's no double bonds, that means the product is fully saturated, so that falls into the saturated fat category. If you see 18.1 oleic, so animal fat is high in oleic acid. We actually make a pourable product that's even higher in oleic so that it remains pourable. you see 18.1 or 18:1. That 1 means that there's one double bond. That means it's a monounsaturated fat. And anytime you see 2 or 3 after that carbon chain number, it's polyunsaturated fat. Okay, I do want to make it, the reason this is my commercial is that South Chicago Packing, who I work for, sponsors me being here. They, allow me, I'm working right now. It's my, 9 to 5 time. So I want to thank South Chicago Packing for allowing me to be here. And so this is a little bit about South Chicago Packing. We are Miniat Family Holdings is the parent company. There are 2 companies under Miniat Holdings, that's South Chicago Packing and Ed Miniat. So this company began over 120 years ago. It basically was started, the family members that incorporated it were 2 brothers, right? 2 brothers? Yeah, 2 brothers. Names right here. And then in 72, Miniat purchased the South Chicago processing plant, which is nearby. I'll point it out in a few seconds here. So we are officially 50 years old as a company this year and have done a few things to celebrate our last year, I should say, our 50th anniversary of being South Chicago Packing. We became one of the earlier companies deodorizer products. So that is taking the animal fat and taking the volatiles out of it. That means taking the flavor out of it so that you can, use animal fat without having it be really barnyardy or, animal tasting. In 2015, we opened our second plant. Again, I'll show that to you in a little bit. In 2020, we launched our first B2C. You all know what that means now. That was a Wagyu beef tallow. We have it in a 42-ounce container, and we sell it on Amazon. So, and that product is a fun story. And if I have time at the end, I will maybe tell a little bit more about the story of how that began. Okay, then in 2023, we're hoping to get this launched, and this is the patent pending product. So we're going to make a spray Wagyu. So animal fat is solid at room temperature. So you have something that's solid at room temperature and you put it into a spray can, you're going to hit that spray button and it's just going to sit in the can because it's solid. So we're turning that into a liquid, so a Wagyu liquid, so that it stays liquid in the can, and then you can spray it like you'd use Pam or something like that. So it'll be the first animal fat spray can in the market. So we're hoping to get that patented and launched here in 2023. And we're still a privately held company, 5th generation family-owned company. Pete is one of the 5th generation here. Pete is our corporate chef. So, okay, our products, again, still part of the commercial here. We have liquid oleo. So that's one where we sell a lot of products to national chain restaurants. They're used to using vegetable oil, so they like to pour it out of a bottle into their fryers. So we've had to come up and make a product that is pourable. So this is our pourable liquid. Our standard product is a 50-pound cube. It's 12 by 13 by 12, so it's not very big, but it's 50 pounds. So I'm lifting those 50-pound boxes every day. And those are going to, food service chains and national restaurant customers as well. Then you see the picture of the Wagyu up there as well as our consumer product. We're selling it on Amazon and just got our Shopify site up and going to order it on Shopify through our own website. So southchicagopacking.com, I think it is. Okay, so our lard products, so that's the pork fat. Again, we're selling that to bakeries, food service, and we do have a lard product that we're selling to retail as well, again, on Amazon and Shopify. So that's kind of our product line that we currently have. So, okay, this slide I'm just trying to impress you with some big fancy words, but these are really the processes that we have. So animal fat is actually a byproduct of the meat industry. So if somebody wants to buy a steak, that steak has been, cut up, and they're trimming the fat off of that, that piece of meat, and that fat needs to go somewhere. That fat then is rendered. We don't do the rendering ourselves. It used to be back in '72 we did rendering ourselves, but we don't do the rendering anymore. Instead, the big meat houses, the Cargills and the Tysons of the world, are actually doing the rendering, and then that rendered fat comes in train tankers. So those big black round train tankers that you see could be filled with animal fat. And if you come over to our yard, you'll see like 20 some odd or more in our rail yard every day. So what we do then is take it a step further, and these are the different processes that we can do. And I'm not going to read each one, but basically, the easiest and simple thing is just filter and bleach it. So if you ever see the word RBD, so you might see an RBD soybean oil, refined, bleached, deodorized. That's what RBD stands for. So that's kind of that first process where we're filtering and bleaching it. All the flavor remains in the product at that point. It's not until the second step on there, deodorization, that you can, deodorization is basically steam. You're steaming it so the volatiles come off it. The volatiles being the flavor components, and what you're left with is just the animal fat with a lot less flavor components, a lot less color components. And then from there we can fractionate it, make the oil, or we can hydrolyze it or hydrogenate it. And that way we're adding hydrogen to the process, getting rid of all those double bonds so that it's fully saturated. And basically, it's hydrogen everywhere in there. And that makes it harder to, and a lot of times we're fully hydrogenating products for things like candle wax and paperboard applications. Okay, this is just quick, our two plants. So we're located really close by. We're at Pershing or 39th and Morgan. So just on the other side of the expressway and down the road a little bit. You can't really see the rail yard. Hopefully you can all see here. We tore down all of this building right there, and that's being rebuilt right now. The new structure is up. Our new kitchen is going to be in there, as well as office buildings and some new production capability. And then the big rail yard I talked about is right here. So you can see some of the trains right there. But that's kind of our plans. Okay, now we've got to the point where you guys, why you all came here. I think this is why you came today. It might have been for the free lunch. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start. How did I get interested in food science? And believe me, when I was in high school, I had no idea what food science was. When I was in college, I don't think I really knew what food science was. Basically, my interest started in 4-H. I basically cooked for the 4-H. And are you guys familiar with 4-H even? I mean, I grew up in a really small rural town, and real small rural towns have county fairs, and that county fairs have competitions. And so the 4-H is a very popular way to get into the county fairs and show off your stuff. So I always like to talk and brag about my first place. I think I had first place 4 years in a row for my chocolate chip cookies. And I had a really weird experience just recently. I watched a movie called Cake. It's with Jennifer Aniston and Anna Kendrick. It's from 2014. And it's kind of a sad story because one of them commits suicide. But she comes back and is talking, and she's talking about all I wish is that I would have baked a yellow cake from scratch for my son. And it's like, wow, I haven't cooked I haven't made a yellow cake from scratch probably since high school. Maybe I did it in college, but it's probably been for. So I was like, I'm making a yellow cake from scratch tomorrow. And my wife kind of looks at me and is like, why don't you, what do you mean? What do you mean making it from scratch? You just made yellow cake. You made a yellow cake the other day. You bought the box. And I was like, no, you don't buy a box. You take the flour and put all the ingredients together. So I actually did. I made a yellow cake from scratch, and then the frosting from scratch. I didn't go to the store and buy a can. Now it turned out very dense, which then my wife is saying, "Oh, what made it turn out dense?" And it's like it could have been that I had old baking soda. It could be the flour was old. I'm not sure. Still tasted good. But man, all of a sudden it was like brought back this memory of like, oh yeah, that's right. I actually entered the 4-H County Fair on the cake competition too. I did both yellow cake and white cake in different years. So I had the experience of both. And then of course my wife asked me, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between white cake and yellow cake? It's simple, egg yolks. You leave out the egg yolks if you want it to be white. You add the egg yolks if you want it to be yellow. Okay, so again, I'm in high school. I have no exposure to food companies. I grew up in a small rural town. I mean, I'm talking rural. I mean, there's more cows in my county where I grew up than there are people. So I have no exposure to food companies, don't know anything about it. So I actually go off to college for a degree in hotel restaurant management, thinking, I know I like to cook, I like to bake. Let's go open a restaurant. Maybe that's what I should do. And of course, they had this class my second semester, my freshman year, that was Introduction to Hospitality Management. And they basically told me, you're going to be working 90 hours a week and you're going to give it $12,000 a year. And I was just like, oh, and you're going to be working Christmas and Thanksgiving. I'm just like, there's got to be something better than that. That's like, I want to spend time with my family. So I wasn't smart enough to know that there was actually advisors. So if you're having some career choice thoughts, find an advisor in your university. They're there. They are there. I wasn't smart enough to do that. So I basically started taking lab classes because I really enjoyed my lab classes. So I'm taking all these lab classes. And then finally my junior year, I'm like, I should try to figure out what my degree is going to be in here. So again, instead of talking to an advisor, I look up, what credits I need to graduate. And sure enough, this food technology, I only need, so many more credits for that. In fact, I need 3 less credits than any other of these majors. One was like foods and equipment. I don't even know what you do with that. So that's how I ended up in my food science and food technology career, is because it was the fewest number of credits that I needed left. I knew what I enjoyed doing. I just didn't know there was a degree in food science and what you would do with that degree. And literally the day I graduated from that university, I thought my job would be QA in a food manufacturing plant. That's all I knew. I mean, I didn't know there was anything other than that. So, sorry, I'm not used to talking so much. So I'm sending out resumes trying to get a QA job. University of Wisconsin South has a good placement program. Somebody had on their placed had a job posting down in Chicago for a company that did seasonings, whatever that was. So I'm like, sent in my resume, and sure enough, I got an interview. So I'm driving down to Chicago, the big city, nervous, and I go into this interview, and basically they say, well, can you taste this chip and tell me what you're tasting? I chew the chip up and try to describe it, and they gave me another one. I just described what I was tasting. I think there was even a third one I tasted. The one I sort of remember is Doritos Ranch flavor, because my brother loved the Doritos Ranch, so I knew exactly what it was as soon as I started tasting it. And sure enough, I got hired for my first job. So what am I doing? So I'm doing seasoning and flavor development for the snack food industry. So basically, I'm in a lab 8 hours a day, blending things up together, putting them on chips and tasting them. I was like, this is the greatest job ever. I've stayed thin. Well, I've got good genes and fast metabolism. But I also ran every day at lunchtime. So made that a pretty much, until COVID. COVID has kind of thrown me off, but until COVID hit, I've always worked out at lunchtime. So let's talk that first job. The company is now, it's a supplier. So that's a B2B company, business to business, a supplier of ingredients to other companies. So but basically what, and the company is now called Givaudan. But when I started, it was called National Starch and Chemical. And then National Starch and Chemical was owned by Unilever. Unilever decided to put 3 flavor companies together, and decided to call those 3 flavor companies Quest International. So Quest International became like the 4th largest flavor company in the world. And then at some point, Givaudan bought them out to become the largest flavor company in the world. So to make it simple, I just put Givaudan down there as my first job instead of listing out all of the companies that it was. Okay, so with that company, I'm developing seasonings for potato chips. And I don't know how many of you got a chance to taste the Snyder's of Hanover honey and onion.
Honey and mustard.
Mustard and onion.
Yeah, honey, mustard, and onion snacks.
This bowl
They're
back
back
here,
there.
if you grabbed it.
Okay. So this is basically my first big claim to fame. It's still out there. But I also like to tell the story of woes of it. So basically in this process, if you know how mustard is made, you basically ground up mustard seed, add some vinegar to it, add some, turmeric maybe to add a little color to it or whatever. And, so I think we had 3 people in the lab working on this, and they're all, trying to create this mustard flavor to add to the, onion and to the honey. And I was kind of like, this other guy in our company does this thing called spray drying. Why can't we just take French's yellow mustard and spray dry it and put it into our seasoning? And I talked to the guy, and he was like, well, yeah, let's go see if it works. And sure enough, it was an extremely easy process because you need like 40% moisture, exactly what, mustard is, to get it to run through the pipes. And basically spray drying, I'll probably explain it later because I had another job in spray drying, but basically you put it through a pipe, it atomizes, so a thin spray goes out before it hits the wall. The walls are 400 degrees. So before it hits those walls, it dries, comes out at the bottom as a powder. So all the moisture is going out the exhaust fan. So I was like, oh, this is fabulous. Let's make this mustard powder. Let's put it in the seasoning. It was a big success. And I don't remember the conversation I had, but I basically went to my boss and said, this is sort of unique. Should we do anything, about it? And she was like, oh, let's just keep it as intellectual property. Well, if you want something as intellectual property, you better be manufacturing the next trade show you go to, and this is exactly what happened. That person that was spray drying it has it on their table as a trade show for a product that they now can do. So we lost all control of having spray dried mustard, and that should have been my first patent. If I'd ever heard of patents when I was in your age, I might have known. And I actually do have another presentation all about patents and getting a patent and trying to get a patent. But that mustard flavor that's in that pretzel piece should be patented. So from Givaudan, sales guy came to me after working there about 4.5 years and said, any interest in maybe, quietly, any interest in, working for Frito-Lay? They've got opening, they want somebody with seasoning experience. So I was like, don't you need a master's or a PhD to work at Frito-Lay? And he was like, no, I think if you've got the expertise, they'll hire you. So sure enough, went down for the interview, and I was hired within Frito-Lay. So claim to fame at Frito-Lay is the Harvest Cheddar. I developed that many years ago for them. And a bunch of other seasonings, but that's the one most people still know and remember. So then I was married at the time we moved to Frito-Lay. moved my wife away from her family. And I didn't mention earlier, I happen to be a really lucky person. So even getting that first job out of college, to me, it's like I had no experience in product development, and the year before I was picking raspberries during the summer, and now I'm like developing seasonings. I'm actually a food scientist. Well, Frito-Lay was looking to reduce headcount, so they took volunteer separation. So over Christmas, I was back up in the Chicagoland area, spending time with my wife's family, and I finally agreed with Keebler, who's in Elmhurst, Illinois, that I would come in and interview. Came in and interviewed after Christmas. It was like the 5th or 6th of January. I get a call from Keebler saying, okay, we want to make you this offer. This is what the offer is going to be. That afternoon, I walk into a meeting at Frito-Lay, and they're saying, we want to get rid of 10% of our R&D staff. Anybody that volunteers will, give them this extra bonus check. So I was like, I volunteer. So that got me back to the Chicagoland area. So now I'm working with, whoops, I missed a slide there. Oh yeah, that's right. So these next 2 slides are a presentation that I actually gave on seasoning development. I gave the presentation at Texas A&M University down in College Station. And it's one of those where it's like, as a food science, you may know this stuff. As a regular person, you may not. And this is just one example of things that something I think is interesting that a food scientist would know, but the average person is not going to know. There are really, salt, the moral of the story here, salt is not salt. So we've got evaporated salt, we've got Allberger salt, we've got dendritic salt, and then we've got sea salt. Now, sea salt was made sort of famous by the Food Network. People started, demanding more sea salt. In my definition, all salt is sea salt. It may be a dried up sea, and they're harvesting it as salt, but all salt. But what they're really talking about when they're talking about sea salt is that it's high in minerals, and that high in minerals might give it more of a little extra salty taste. So people sell it as being, perceptive of having more salt with using less salt. And then besides the 4 different salts that you could use, then there's all kinds of granulations. So you've got, what's called flour salt, that's a 70 mesh. You've got fine flake, which is about 50 mesh, so a little bit thick, a little bit bigger. Then you got coarse salt, which is really big, or you got pretzel salt, which is medium size, so that it sticks onto a pretzel when you're eating a pretzel. And then, of course, you've got super, super small, which is the micro-sized salt. If it goes down to about 325 microns, it'll actually be suspended in oil. So that's something like for the honey mustard and onion, you needed that salt to suspend in oil because they make a slurry to put it onto the pretzel piece. Another interesting story about that pretzel piece is that when that seasoning was developed, they just wanted to find a use for the pretzels that would break in their factory. And some smart food scientists said, I can make a product out of this. Let's put some flavoring on this pretzel piece and sell it. And it did so well that they actually had to develop equipment to actually break the pretzels so they'd have enough pretzel pieces for it. Okay, so I'm a visual person. I want to actually see what something looks like. So here you can actually see the cubed shape of the evaporated salt. You can see the, kind of the flaky of the dendritic, or you can see the Allberger, which is kind of a pyramid shape. All of them having their specific use in product development. So those are just 2 slides to kind of demonstrate as something you might know as a food scientist that salt is not salt. Okay, so I decided Keebler actually paid for a graduate degree. So I was kind of like, I'd actually started going towards a graduate degree when I was with the seasoning company. Didn't do anything when I was at Frito-Lay. And that, I mean, Frito-Lay is a very intense company. I mean, I was only there 3 years, and I probably learned more in those 3 years than I have 10 years anyplace else. I mean, it's a fantastic company, a well-oiled machine as far as a company or an R&D facility. So I decided when I got back to Keebler and they were offering to pay for an advanced degree, I decided to go the MBA route versus the master's in food science route. And mostly that decision was made because I really got tired of marketing people coming over and telling me how to do my job. I was like, I can go get one of those MBAs, it's like maybe then I'll have more credibility to fight back a little bit. So basically I got my MBA and started as a functional foods for health program industry liaison. So that was the University of Illinois and the University of Illinois at Chicago, a joint program. And basically, if I wasn't an introvert, and I could have made such good connections, because basically I was talking to vice presidents of all the large corporations, food manufacturers in the world. But I'm an introvert, so I'd only talk to them when I needed to talk to them instead of networking and building out my network. But basically, we had, at the time I left, I ended up with 27 food industries, marketing, our R&D teams involved with this functional foods for health. And basically, the idea was to promote the research that was going on within the University of Illinois. Small town guy, small university. We weren't doing research at University of Wisconsin Stout. It's like you'd read those papers and they were always from, Illinois or, so there was research going on at these universities that was, really at the time. I mean, resveratrol from the red grape was a big one they were working on, a lot of soy work. So basically I would connect the researchers with industry, trying to get more research money into the university. So super interesting job. I learned a lot about how to read a research paper. There's a lot going on. If you're reading research papers, a lot going on in universities, if you know how to connect with that university and see what's going on with them. Okay, so, but I did find the university a little stifling. So, if you want to grow or you've got an idea and want to run with it, it's very hard to do in a university. There's too many channels. So I was like, I need to get back to industry because I like industry a whole lot better than, so I ended up in the dietary supplement world. So, and I actually accepted an international sales job, which I'm not a salesperson. I'm an R&D person, but they really hired me I did the international sales, which is basically networking with distributors in other countries to have them actually sell. But what they hired me was for my technical expertise so that I could talk about the technical aspects of CLA, and their brand was Totalant CLA. Again, CLA stands for conjugated linoleic acid, fatty acid. So it's a 18 chain carbon with 2 double bonds. So that, all coming into this job I have now, all of that work I did back then kind of, oh yeah, I sort of remember having to do that stuff. So I did that for a few years. I think it was about 4. And then it's a small little company out of Norway. They decided that they wanted to sell out to a larger company, get better distribution. So I ended up going along with the acquisition to a company called Cognis. Cognis is now, I believe, it's been sold to BASF, so a much larger company. But when I was there, it was with Cognis. And there I was a global product manager. Interesting job. And a good time in my life to be in that job. The global was global. So I got to travel around the world. So this little food scientist from, a small little town in Wisconsin now is traveling to Japan. My worst experience in my life giving a speech or a talk was in Japan, because I had to talk a little bit and then the interpreter talked and I talked. And it's like when you're up here talking, it's like there's a certain rhythm that you're in. And it's like I couldn't find my rhythm. I just ended up picking up the piece of paper and I just read. It was like, I was like, this is terrible. But basically, yeah, I got, traveled around the world with that job. So, as a food scientist, there's opportunities, to travel the world. So basically, what is a product, a global product manager or a product manager? My definition of it is that I was a cheerleader between R&D, sales, and the supply chain. And cheering on the product to make sure R&D was doing some new development with it. Sales knew what the latest was happening was it, and then kept track of the supply chain to make sure we were able to keep making as much as we needed to make. It was a good job, but I sort of missed the lab. I don't like being in the lab every single day, but I really like being in the lab, mixing things up, making new stuff. So I decided, I've spent about 8 years now with Tonal and CLA. I want to get back into the food industry. So I ended up going to John B. Sanfilippo, which they touted as the Fisher Nut brand in all of my interviewing. And so I was like, oh, good, I'm back with a well-known product brand name. Well, I learned basically on my second day that you're not Fisher Brands, you're a private label manufacturer that happens to make the Fisher brand because Procter & Gamble wanted to sell it and you were making it and you just bought it. They had no idea how to manage a consumer brand. So that was my experience in the private label industry. To me, private label is a very difficult business. I mean, basically, it's really like you need to have the lowest price and always the lowest price. And there's going to be, somebody else doing private label that's going to undercut you. And then the big corporations think, well, can you do this for me? Because it's going to be unique and neat and I'll be the only one doing it. Well, I'm fine doing that, but that takes up, 1%, 1 day in 352 days of the year. What am I going to do with that line for the rest of the time? The Walmarts and the Krogers didn't want to hear that. They wanted to say, we've got this unique product that only we sell. So to me, that was a very difficult. So what I sort of skipped in this because I went from the private label back to Givaudan, so the flavor company. So then I spent 8 years developing seasonings again, and actually managing a group. So I actually got to spend, 30% of my time at least on the bench, blending things up, eating potato chips again. But I did a lot of travel. I really enjoyed the travel, getting out with the sales team to call on the customers, build those technical to technical relationships, which I believe are truly important. And it's really amazing to me that what I've seen is that if a salesperson goes into talking to an R&D person, there's one story that gets told. If an R&D person comes in and talks to an R&D person, there's a whole nother story told. So there's sort of a language of R&D maybe that it's a different language, the way it's talked, or it's like, you're R&D, you're a food scientist, I trust you a little bit more, I'm going to be a little more open with you. Okay, so after that, my next job was spray drying. I talked about spray drying and how it all works. Basically, spent about 15, 16 months as director of R&D for CoreFX. At the time, they were in the north side. I could ride my bike. It was a wonderful commute. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. And then I ended up with animal fats, so product development, South Chicago packing. I've been told I have 5 minutes left, so I want to get through. Really, there's only one more slide, and that's this one. So this is, and I'm sure this is going to be shared, right? So people can get this.
Sure.
So basically, if you want to know more about food science, I think Abby, the food scientist, does a fabulous job. She's got a PhD, undergrad, and a PhD in food science from the University of Wisconsin. She explains food science in 2 minutes. She talks about 6 jobs as a food scientist. I think it's been a while since I watched that one, but I think in my mind, there were 7. I think she missed something on the regulatory side. And then she has over 40 videos talking about, how butter is made, just some fun stuff on food science. So fabulous. And then I would say be sure that if you're interested in food science, you need to join the Institute of Food Technologists. There's a Chicago section, Institute of Food Technology, that has a annual trade show in November. But at the national one, which is it's in Chicago most of the time, there's student posters. So if you can do something fun and interesting and get as a poster, or just go read the posters, interesting research going on. And then there's the American Oil Chemist Society, which is all about oil chemistry. Maybe really boring to the average person, but I find them very interesting. I went in person like 4 years ago, and there was somebody talking about bug protein, and I kind of was like, oh, I just want to see what that's about. Ended up that it's the black black soldier fly larva, and it's a way of making protein kind of for third world countries, but they're trying to introduce it here. So it's a cheap protein. Well, I learned that larva is 40% fat. Well, what are you doing with the fat? We're an animal fat company. So we're having talks now to figure out what we can do with that fat. So again, they have student posters. So an interesting way to, get to learn more about the research that's going on around the world. So, and then my last slide is that we do have a summer internship program. So it's not easy to find. So it's at Miniat.com is the website. And Miniat is a sister company, so they sort of manage it. And this little thing right up here that's called interns, that's what you need to click and kind of follow it through. I'm not 100% it's all posted yet, but like I have a R&D summer intern. I have my big constraint here is that people have to be able to taste lard and tallow because it's part of the job. And I really like them to be able to lift a 50-pound box. Other than that, it's a lot of fun science. It's those two constraints. But if you don't eat animal fat, I would still apply because we also have quality control or quality assurance jobs at both South Chicago and at Miniat. So there might be an opportunity there for you to talk to them about their positions. I think that's it. If anybody's got any questions. Feels like I talked really fast.
We have about 3 minutes for questions. So if anybody has questions, please.
Oh, good.
So I know this is like from early on, but for your Wagyu tallow and the spray oil, why did you guys choose Wagyu beef?
Okay, so Wagyu has kind of got a high end perception, so it's considered a better cut of meat. So the family, the Miniat family has connections to ranchers. So it's actually a rancher that came to us and said, hey, we've got 30 pounds of trim. Trim is the fat that comes off of the meat in our freezers. Is there anything you can do with it? And the difficult part is we're used to doing millions of pounds. I mean, we sell 400 million pounds a year. We're used to doing millions of pounds. So we're kind of like 30,000. I'm not sure that's going to work in our system. But the ownership was like, we really need to figure this out. So basically, that's kind of how it came about. And the product is doing fabulous. Any other questions? Because I have my own questions that I've had from other people. Yes.
Does it have a specific taste profile, the Wagyu? Yeah.
It's definitely a little more beefy than like a typical animal fat. It's got a little more color to it. And we chose in the filter bleaching process not to put as much bleaching clay in there. And bleaching clay is like a natural earth clay that's used to clean the product. So it's a little darker in color, a little more beefy flavor.
So it has some detectable umami to it.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I've got 2 questions that have been asked at other times that I like to answer.
Time for one.
You have one?
Yeah, then we have to clear out for the next
fast
class.
Talker. Okay, so one is, what can you expect from being in R&D? And my answer was, you probably can expect to have your job eliminated at some point. I didn't mention it, but my job has been eliminated at least 4 times, if not 5 times. And the other important part to know about that is LinkedIn is a fabulous tool. Because from Givaudan, when I was at Givaudan and my job at CoreFX, my job was eliminated. I had no idea it was coming. 7 days later, I was working at CoreFX, and it was because of LinkedIn. I didn't know anybody at CoreFX. It was just the LinkedIn connections put me there. So I should see 20 or 30 new LinkedIn requests, because you need to build. It's very important to network. And the other thing you can expect as a food scientist is to wash a lot of dishes. There's times I go home and it's like, no, I don't want to wash any more dishes. Now, if you get lucky and get into R&D at the Ed Miniat company, and I know no other food company that does this, but somehow they have a night crew that comes in and does all their dishes. I don't know how they manage to do that, because I don't know any other company that has that. I do my own dishes. Okay.
You actually have 5 minutes. We get to 1:45. So if you, students, you have some questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you for
here.
asking the question. Anybody else?
Question?
Yeah, so if you had a bachelor's degree from food science and you're going to continue to master's, what are the cons of taking a business MBA compared to food science?
You want my opinion?
Yeah.
Is an MBA is so much easier than. I mean, I worked much harder in the science classes and figuring out the science in my undergrad than any of the classes, except for my statistical analysis in my MBA, where I actually, took in the class. But yeah, science is much more difficult.
I have a question. So which roles in your all the years that you have worked did you enjoy the most? And like kind of R&D or like supply chain or like QC, like what roles?
Yeah. So I really like research and development. I like being on the lab. Like I said, I thought my career path would be regulatory, or not regulatory, it would be quality control. And it's just like, quality control, it's a good job, but basically they're doing the same thing every day. And, with R&D, it's like, I've got, I think 30 some projects going on right now that I'm juggling, where I need to get on the lab on some of them just making calls and networking, trying to get things done, making connections, building relationships with other R&D people, kind of quality. It's like you're in the lab. So excellent if you're a super extrovert, you don't have to talk to people. But I'm an extrovert or an introvert, but I like to talk to people once in a while.
So do you have any tips for us, like if we are going into R&D, that we shouldn't be part of any layoffs, or like sometimes it happens, but
Yeah.
do you?
I would say if you're in R&D, so basically, if we go into a recession, so if the economy is right on the teetering point right now, being in a recession, but if it goes into a deep recession, basically, okay, advertising might get cut a little bit first. The very next thing that gets cut is research and development, because what you're working on for research and development is for 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. So it's like they don't care what's happening 5 years from now. They need to get their money now. So those jobs get cut. So my thought would be just save money, be prepared for it, and and with LinkedIn, you're getting. I've always found another job typically within 4 months. So it's been relatively easy. And I didn't want to move out of Chicago, so it's even more difficult.
And
So,
do you think recession is gonna affect on food industries and product development?
well, say that?
Like recession is gonna affect, if it comes, is it gonna affect on food industries?
I think it already has to the extent it probably is going to, with just the inflation and the prices of packaged goods and ingredients and such. So
Any last questions before we wrap up?
Yes.
Hi, I have a question just, thank you. I had a question just, going back, because you took a lot of lab courses in undergrad. You know, what were some of the like skills, whether those lab skills or soft skills that you learned in undergrad that kind of helped you prepare for your various roles to where you are now in R&D?
So how to set up an experiment. So even the simple baking classes that we would like use Crisco butter and, soybean oil. And we would make muffins, those three things. So even like the process of setting that up and then writing a report. I mean, that's skills I still use today. I mean, I set up an experiment, I see how it turns out, I write up a report and report back on it. So, I mean, just yesterday, we're getting some complaints on our lard that it seems like the lard is not filled enough. Well, I went out to the line, so we definitely put 42 ounces in every can. Every can is tested, so there's 42 ounces in every can. So then I'm like, okay, maybe we fluff that stuff gets fluffed a little bit. Maybe if it goes through a melt, it drops down a little bit because there's not as much air or nitrogen in it. So basically, I set up a little experiment where I took a ruler, put it down in there, measured the distance from the top of the can to where the product is. I've now put it in the oven, and I took a picture before. I'm going to take a picture afterwards and see if there's any drop, and that would be the explanation of what's happening. Why we're seeing shrinkage. So every day.
So thanks again for, I think we really appreciate the time. Thank you for coming. That's going to end our seminar for today. Come back next week. If you would like to connect with Dewey, please let Cindy know, and she can help to facilitate you linking up with him on LinkedIn. Thank you. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone online. We appreciate it.